Lantern clocks are, I suppose, in some ways a bit of a minority sport. You don't see very many of them outside of museums, and people that do have them often cherish them and regard them probably more of works of art than something they actually tell the time by. People think of lantern clocks as being something that's sort of ancient and was perhaps not terribly accurate, but that's not the case. In fact, they were beautifully made, and these were made at a time when they didn't have a dividing engine to accurately divide all the wheels. So they were all divided by hand. They were pitched out with compasses or using geometry, and they probably made a master wheel, and from that they would then cut all the other wheels. So you have something that is really extraordinary. Most of the clocks have come from private collections in the UK, but some of them also have come a great distance. One of them was in the Time Museum in Chicago and then passed a private collector who's brought it over for the exhibition. And also another one by John Shaw, a lovely quarter striking clock, which is very rare, which unbelievably was consigned to a scrapyard in the Isle of Wight at the beginning of the war. The clock that I probably favour most over all of them is one that's not assigned at all. It's made either by Thomas Knifton or Peter Clossen. Made about 1658, within a year of the pendulum being discovered. And in that way it's quite a rare clock because all of the earlier clocks were made with a balance escapement. But in this case it was fitted with a pendulum almost as soon as the clock was made. So that must have been quite irritating for the new owner to buy his lovely balance clock and then only to find that within a year or two a new escapement had been discovered. The general feel of it would suggest it's probably been put in by the original maker of the lantern clock. It's by no means the most valuable, but that is the lovely thing about lantern clocks. They do seem to have a personality and you do get very attached to them. One of the first clocks I ever saw arrived on the back of a flat cart pulled by a horse out from Glasgow. And I can remember this grandfather clock being slid off the back of the lorry by my dad into his shop and just sort of standing, looking up at it and thinking, this is just so exciting. And it just never went away. This is the dial of the clock by William Boyer, made around 1620. So this is one of his very earliest clocks. In fact, we believe it is the earliest clock that we know to exist by him. His name's signed along the bottom here, and then above it these tiny little tight concentric circles which are not in any other dial that we know of. This piece here, that's a little detail on the bottom of the hammer arbor which is sort of typical of Boyer decorating the steelwork even at this early stage. And you'll see they are radial from the centre line here, and this is where William Boyer divided his wheels, because this clock was made before they had what they call a dividing engine, so they had to be divided by hand, or they made a master wheel which would have been much bigger, and from that they would have divided out the lines, and then they hand cut all these teeth, and they would have hand cut it using a little hand saw. You can see the size of the blade on there, it's really tiny. There is quite a history of clockmaking in Lewes. Richard Comber, who was one of the finest clockmakers of the late 18th century, really influenced a generation of clockmakers in Lewes and his competitors as well, who would certainly have had to raise their game. So we're incredibly lucky in Lewes because you can actually buy Lewes clocks still and sell them as being, you know, the best that are available anywhere in the country. The thing I find most amazing about the lantern clocks is the fact they still engage people in exactly the same way as they did when they were made nearly 400 years ago. They are the summary of somebody who's both an artist and also a mechanic, as they might have described them 400 years ago. They look beautiful and they represent the age that they were made in so well.